You're listening to Built to Convert, the podcast where growth-minded marketers, founders, and creators come to level up. No hype, no guesswork, just bold insights that drive results. Let's go.
Hey everyone, I'm Tyler Lane, founder of Session Interactive and the host of Built to Convert. This show is all about strategy, data, and innovation, driving real business growth. And today we're getting into the deep end on what's next in AI, tech, and digital transformation. Built to Convert is brought to you by Session Interactive. We help brands grow by turning complex data into clear, actionable strategy. From SEO and analytics to media and performance consulting, we give marketing teams the insights they need to grow smarter, faster. Learn more at sessioninteractive.com. All right, guys, today I'm joined by Paul Lewis, Chief Technology Officer at Pythian, where he's helped organizations leverage cloud, AI, and data to drive real transformation. Before Pythian, Paul served as the global CTO for Hitachi Vantara and is one of the most forward-thinking leaders in enterprise tech today. I know this. I've chatted with him a couple of times. It's pretty impressive stuff. We're going to explore what's possible with AI, what's practical, and how companies like ours and others can plug into the future. Paul, it's great to see you. It's great to have you. Thanks for your time.
Thanks for inviting me. I always enjoy these conversations. It's always fun to see kind of the other side of the equation on things like use cases and sort of what the real definition of my AI might be as compared to the news and commercials you read.
It's wild, right?
Yeah.
So much information, so much misinformation. People are quote unquote experts. We'll probably talk about that a little bit. I offer AI strategy now. It's like, do you? You weren't doing that a couple months ago. So
right.
Prompt engineering expert, you name it. Paul, let's get started here. How did you first get into tech, and what pulled you toward large scale digital transformation work? I know it's a lot of what you're doing now at Pythian.
Sure. So academically was comp sci, right? So my first set of jobs was application development. And I realized very early on in my career that I was a mediocre at best developer. So I said to myself, there's another journey here. Well, what do you think that journey might be? And it was technology leadership. So I moved from sort of mediocre developer to, meandering middle manager. From meandering middle manager, I sort of spread the wealth in terms of product development, product management, IT architecture leadership, and then eventually the CTO. So I was the CTO in banking for 17 years and then moved to global CTO of Hitachi for a decade and now at Pythian. But it's given me a pretty broad appreciation of the spectrum of technology. So 17 years in banking was IT, right? 29 data centers, 5,000 workloads, what it means to, for the lights to go out at 3 a.m., reputational risks of, ATMs not working, to Hitachi, which is a very OT-centric environment, right? Operational technology, bullet trains, nuclear power plants, lights out mines, right? Machines that you have to worry about stopping, right? Maybe heart monitors, MRI machines that are doing sort of predictive diagnostics. That's much more about the human centricity of it. And the irony is that OT consumes more IT than IT does, right? So Hitachi, famous, they, build and sell 500 petabytes a year, but they consume exabytes a year just in their internal operations, right? And then on the Pythian side, moving from IT to OT to sort of cloud, AI, and sort of on the advisory side. And that's just kind of the work stuff. I do spend time in academia in sort of, I'm on the board of Masters of AI and Masters of Management and Masters of Tech and help, instruct there. And then I'm on the board of a variety of companies, including IT Media, that puts me in front of 150 CIOs and CTOs every single quarter. So I get a real appreciation for, the realness of the CI role, the realness of technology trends, the realness of its applicability. That's all things I get to see time and time again.
Yeah, that's great stuff. And it like as a practitioner in the past, right? And then recognizing, hey, I'm not suited for that. I can resonate with that a lot. Are you thankful? Obviously, you have those skills. around being, a practitioner way back when. And now you're like, okay, I understand some of the core concepts. Things have changed significantly, but that clearly helps you today, correct? Would you say?
100%. In fact, not only has it changed significantly, it's in cycles,
Yeah.
right? There were low code, no code options 30 years ago. There are low code, no code, vibe AI coding options now.
Yeah.
Right? So there's just circle of, do I need a developer? Do I not need a developer? Do I need a developer? Do I not need a developer? And the irony, of course, is eventually you always need a developer because who do you think develops these things, right? There's coders that develop AI. AI gets applied to circumstance, right? So you get to see the churning of ideas and its applicability.
I love that. And it seems like too, just the human element is not going anywhere for at least a while. There always is a need of that within AI. Like obviously we'll get deeper into that, but would you agree with that statement for now? And obviously AI can go in wild different ways. Automation can as well.
Certainly true, especially since it's very incentive based. Like you take cloud as an example versus AI. Only 25% of all infrastructure acquired is in the cloud. It's still 75% sit in the data center. And you can tell why that's true is because, the Hitachis, the Dells, the IBMs, the Ciscos, they'll exist as companies, multi-billion-dollar companies, right? They exist to build and sell hardware. Therefore, hardware doesn't go away. Right. And when you look at the big institutions, the governments, the insurance companies, the telcos, the banks, they buy hardware. Right. So same would be true with AI. There are incentives to have programmatic interfaces into AI use cases. And therefore, there's incentive in, building core complex technology that AI isn't necessarily going to be able to duplicate.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Paul's a busy guy, clearly. He got one or two things going on the career front. And then, of course, on the personal fund and then some of the passion projects. Love to hear that. Talk to me some of these inflection points that shaped how you lead and innovate, Paul, because I think, you're bringing such a diverse background to Pythian where you're at now. With Hitachi, with the previous bank institution too, what are these inflection points that you can highlight during these different career shifts that would be applicable and things that resonate with you today?
There's definitely been role changes in leadership that has made some pretty big distinctions, right? So when I started this type of job 30 years ago, it was very blinking lights in the data center, red, green, yellow projects. Like that was the job in IT. Is you had a set of projects, you deliver on them, and you had KPIs to deliver on those projects, whether it's be time, quality, or consistency, right? And blinking lights in the data center means I needed to worry about performance and availability. That has evolved in many ways because you either don't control the underlying infrastructure because a good portion of your infrastructure is in the cloud, or I've moved from mostly waterfall to mostly agile. So I'm less concerned about timelines. I'm more concerned about capability to be deployed into production, that I've had to rethink what the makeup of the team looks like, right? So back in the day, it was far more, we'll call it hierarchical. Everybody sits in their own departments, and now it's far more fusion centric, right? You're going to deliver a project with multiple different disciplines in a single team. And I might do that application development. I might do that AI. I might do that from a digital transformation project, but there are more fusion than less fusions. And then finally, I think IT used to be very incremental, right? Think of it as a project management approach where I have a current state, I have a goal of a future state, and then what's my incremental change till I get there? It's very product management centric. Versus now, IT is much more strategic. You start at the end, find out your gaps between the end and today, and then work backwards to say what has to be true in order to achieve that goal, right? It's a very corp strategy version of a product management discipline. So those have been pretty big wave changes in IT over these 30 years.
Significant, yeah. And would you say, again, last 5-10 years, the CTO role has been kind of redefined to a certain extent with AI, real-time data, hybrid cloud, things like that. How would you define your role? Let's say if you had to define it 10 years ago and now you have to define it now, obviously those are core changes. What can you state about that?
So if we take CIO, CTO, CDO, they kind of fall in the same categories.
Totally.
They tended to be leading their practice roles, and therefore they were involved in a much more detailed way in the discipline of IT, a discipline of technology, discipline of data. But over the last 5 years, they've now needed to participate at the executive layer, right? They needed to participate in the digital transformation program, maybe even in charge of the digital transformation program. They are having conversations more often with the CEO and the COO and the CFO. In fact, they've moved from the CFO to the CEO. So now they're having sort of strategic growth conversations versus operating IT conversations. What's interesting is that because they've spent a good portion of their time doing that, they've relied on their second in command, so their VPs, to do most of the internal IT work, which means succession has moved from 2 years to 5 years, 2 years to 4 years, because all of those VPs have not been participating the way the CIOs and CTOs have. So now there's a gap in knowledge, gap in contribution to the organization, and that has to be overcome.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. A really interesting perspective. Let's talk about what you're up to today at Pythian. Talk to me about the framework that you guys have in terms of helping clients evaluate tech trends. There is a lot of noise, as we discussed. Like it's ridiculous out there. When people, I forget who mentioned it. I think Amanda from SparkToro is a SEO such content marketing tool that we use occasionally, and she was highlighting just how narrow-sighted people can be based on their social followings.
Right.
Our LinkedIn audience is saying AI, this SEO is dead, marketing, whatever, all these different things. Again, I'm talking about more the marketing side myself, but how do you come in to properly educate clients, your team, properly educate clients, evaluate trends that are not just hype and not smoke and mirrors or things that are likely going to stay the course, and help the clients prioritize those for their own businesses? I'm curious around that broad question there, but.
So it's so important to be intellectually honest, right? It's very easy to read the news and say, I'm incredibly behind, right? Or read the news and say, these are such amazing use cases. How is it possible that I can't deliver on these amazing use cases? When the reality is, especially when it comes to AI specifically, that there are in fact two races. They're the race to the edge use case that the technology companies are trying to get over, right? So each one of the hyperscalers, the open eyes, are saying, look at all these amazing things we can do, versus the enterprise race and the actual corporation saying, what are we actually ready to be able to implement, and what's actually possible within the constraints of my organization? Because those constraints are real. They're not real at OpenAI. They are real in your organization. You have a real team. You have a real budget. You have a real regulatory boundary. You have real contracts. You have an expectation to both earn revenue and be profitable. Those companies don't have any of those requirements, right? So that means there's two different races. So this intellectual honesty is part of the AI education, right? So I'll spend. Not only does myself and my team have to be well read on both sides of those equations, I've got to bring that intellectual honesty into the AI education. So when we do an AI workshop, which is mostly about readiness, is we say, here's the truth that's happening in the market, right? Here is the good news and the bad news. In fact, I replace that particular set of slides every single week with more good news and more bad news. And then I explicitly talk about why some of these things are good and why some of these things are bad, right? And what you have to think about because of where they are in the hype cycle, right? They're deep in the trough of disillusionment. They're not so far advanced and so far mature that you can just easily implement them. So that honesty is important, but then it's application in terms of the readiness. So I always break it down into 5 parts, right? So part number 1 is how much are you willing to spend on this? Is this $1 of investment, or is this $1 million worth of investment? Because that makes a pretty big difference on where you should be dealing your cards.
Sure.
Right? The very next thing is, well, let's talk a little bit about governance. And I don't mean the big G governance, I mean the small governance, right? So do you have a simple policy in place and what tools your team should be able to use? Or do you have a 3, 4, 5-person team to help make prioritization decisions? Like, these are the easier ones to consume from a governance perspective. And then finally, you've got your deck of cards, right? You got your 52 cards. Of the $1 or $1 million you're willing to spend, is it more going to be on education? So how do I get over the hump of, let's say, prompting, or is it more about building use cases? Because I think it'll be valuable either internally to my organization or part and parcel of my service or product I provide. And then finally, do I put all my cards in sort of the embedded functions where, I use Salesforce, I use Atlassian, I use Slack, I use all these other commercial products that also have AI features that will also provide value. Is that where I put my cards? Or am I 33, 33, 33? Like where am I doing that? And then my final conversation is, can you do any of that based on the state of the nation? So do you have a data warehouse? Do you have API accessible to your knowledge bases? Do you even have a knowledge base, right? Do you have the skill sets to do something like that? And then you come out of that equation with, here's where I want to put all my time and energy, and here's my level of readiness to deliver on that.
There seems like yeah, go ahead.
But that's only true. You can only get through that process with the intellectual honesty of where the state of AI actually is. Because if you're under this appreciation that it can solve all problems and it's free, you are not going to get to the point where it's actually $100,000 in 8 weeks worth of work.
Yeah. Yeah, it seems like a mixture. I love some of the nuggets here. It seems like a mixture of, getting people up to speed and educated properly, but that the honesty component, being honest with them, say, hey, here's your infrastructure. Certain aspects are modern, others are incredibly archaic, and you don't have that internal personnel to correctly implement. And so I love that honesty to show up, because that client's like, okay, I'm ready to implement right away. It's like, okay, no, you're not, right? Let's be honest with you to be successful down the road. Would you agree?
I would, but here's the interesting outcome of these workshops.
Yeah.
We'll do, so think of a workshop as kind of 60% education, 40% activation, which is use case stuff, right? Sure. So we'll do a brainstorm of the use cases, and we'll find 400 great ideas. It's amazing. Okay. Then we will bucketize them, right? We'll say, well, let's describe what these use cases are. And we'll notoriously, 350 of them will be analytics, right? It'll be a dashboard because they all start with, I need to list that, ... Okay, easy bucketizing. This is now BI. And then we'll look at the next 30 and they'll be out of the box machine learning, segmentation, classification, apply algorithm, get best fit line, good to go. Again, it is likely part of their analytics process, but it also might be part of their product process. That's okay. The remaining 20, 15 of them, they'll all be AI. That's the good news, right? 15 of them will be $1 million 6-month projects, right? Unaffordable, not limited ROI, but difficult to predict upfront what that ROI is. But then the 5 are the rich ones, right? Highly productionizable. I could predict the ROI today, not knowing much more information that I see. I'm going to use tool sets that are incredibly mature, like computer vision, right? Or LLMs out of the box, multimodal LLM without having to roll my own. Then those are great, measurable, implementable 3 to 4 week projects that you can do those 5 times over and get, ROIs measured in 30 minutes, not ROIs measured in months or weeks or years. That's kind of the great news. So then when you come into those buckets, now you have the BIs, those 400 ideas are still great ideas. Now we have parallel projects. Let's worry about the 350 that are much more about, do you have your data house in order? Do you have a warehouse? Do you have Looker, right? Do you have something to help create those insights? And then machine learning, do we have a data science team to find and discover insights with more raw data? And then how do we create a software engineering practice so that we can build those AI use cases out of the box? So you can start to get parallel work in place instead of, doing one at a time and only having energy and focus for one thing.
Yeah. I think that it's just the sheer magnitude of it. I think a couple things come to mind, like generative AI. Let me know if you agree with this, but I feel as though like content generation and all of that is one of the worst use cases for AI. Still, there's so many other more applicable aspects to it. What do you think about that statement?
I think it depends highly on how you define AI. So one of the very first things in the education is reconstructing the terms, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Because the AI, from an academic perspective is machines and models to duplicate or replicate sort of human mind and activity. So now you can think data from Star Trek, right? Data from Star Trek is machine and algorithms together.
Mhm.
Right?
Mhm.
Are we anywhere near the data and artificial general intelligence with sentience? No, we're probably a century away from that. The math doesn't exist to do that kind of work,
Sure.
right? But it helps, right? To say, okay, robots are on one side, algorithms on the other, right? And then we're talking algorithms. We say, well, the first set of algorithms you think about is machine learning. That's your very first set of AI models. And then under machine learning is deep learning, a type of machine learning. And then under deep learning is enforcer learning, LLMs, right? That is a type of deep learning. So then
Sure.
you start to say, okay, well, now AI is a set of machine learning algorithms that have types and sets and values based on the data or information it produces. Then you get to LLMs to say LLMs isn't necessarily just generative. LLMs is just a means to prompt questions to get prompted based answers, right? And in fact, it doesn't need to even be a text answer. It might be a prompt as the output to be the LLM to be the input, right? That's the agentic AI implementation where I have multiple orchestrated LLMs reasoning between each other, sort of performing a function. LLM doesn't necessarily mean text creation.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how you define it really then determines that. But yeah, the
Correct.
use cases outside it are almost limitless.
100%. Especially when you look at the buckets of sort of people productivity versus process productivity. At least half of all AI implementations is going to be people productivity, right? So think of it as Copilot, Gemini with Workspace, sidecar to the everyday productivity functions used, collaboration functions, right? That'll be a good chunk of the type of AI that people will see. The other ones will be the process productivity side, where it's about computer vision automation, document automation, user experience automation, and even content creative automation. That's all part and parcel of the process side. The goal isn't necessarily to displace humans, but to what I would generally refer to as being the microwave of language, right? So I wouldn't use a microwave to build a gourmet meal, but I would use it to defrost chicken.
Sure.
Same with AI, right? I wouldn't use AI to create a core application, but I would use it to draft the code for it, to augment the SQL I needed, to draft an insight, and even to create a process automation. Those are good uses. It's just not the displacement of the whole meal.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good point, Paul, because I think it kind of goes back to just like, oh my God, is my job going to be replaced? Right. And then it kind of flip that on your head and say, hey, this is my strategic partner. Right. This is what I'm going to use to bounce ideas to expedite my ideation process and certain things like that. Don't necessarily think about it. It's, hey, it's coming for me. Right. I'm next.
Yeah.
Select career.
Especially since it's still not that accurate, right?
Oh,
so if I'm using a free GPT, it's like 67% good. Well, would you ever put in anything in production that's 67% good? No.
Well, I think that's a really good point too, because people that are, maybe had demoed LLMs in the past and, got a really poor output. And so that there's frustration. There's also like, is this all that chucked up? And then haven't retested because things have advanced significantly in weeks and months and, in short spans, short time periods. So I think would you agree? It's like, okay.
Yeah, 100%. And there's different models to choose from. In fact, it is the very reason why cloud AI tools regressed in the Gartner hype cycle. It in fact left the trough of disillusionment and then last year regressed back into the trough because change was happening so often. It was too often. We rebranded them. They moved from 5 things in the model garden to hundreds of things in the model garden. I now have an ability to both have horizontal and vertical integration between agents. That level of change requires a level of change and expertise in the people, and level of change in the tools that I use, and therefore needed to regress into that world. Do I think we're stable yet in those tools? No. I think there's still lots more change to come.
One thing I'm curious, well, maybe a two-part question here, Paul, for you is some of the moral and ethical concerns associated. Obviously we talked briefly about, hey, it's going to come from my career, but I think more so around, hey, we're on the marketing side. We have our own process around that. We don't deal a lot with PII, but let's say, Google Analytic data or other data, it's like, and that's specific to an individual brand. It's not public facing. What are your thoughts on uploading that information, getting information around that? And then the other second part is data governance. I'm curious, just as a whole, I mean, they're related, of course, what your opinions are on that and how you can ensure people are feeling a little bit more confident, appearing a bit more safe with maybe some safeguards in place. Yeah. What are your thoughts?
Fair concern. And I'm not sure you're going to enjoy the answer. So state of affairs, especially using LLMs, the reality is LLMs are more difficult to draw lineages between use of data and application of data than a machine learning algorithm will. And that's already very black boxy, right?
Sure.
And if you were to string together multiple LLMs that are creating their own reasoning, it's almost impossible to create a lineage between those two worlds. So know that to be true going in, which is why we're probably not ready for a multi-agentic LLM orchestrated environment in a production use case, mostly because of this world. We have both a data quality concern that hasn't been fixed and a data lineage sort of magic that has to be resolved. And then, of course, sort of data use and data bias problems, because as you know, all of these LLMs are trained on corpuses of data that include just as much opinion as it does fact, which is the reason why it's only 67% good in public, right? Where, GPT-2 and 2.5 and below is trained on, and things that you'd find in a library, right? In a university. And then 2.5 and above was trained on everything else that happens in the internet. So NLP got way, way better, but answer correctness or accuracy got way, way worse comparatively. So apply that in a enterprise setting, and all of a sudden you have the same boundary problem. In fact, so much so, the difference between consumer and enterprise is the difference between how important the answer is. In enterprise, the answer always has to be 7. It can't sometimes be 6, sometimes be 7, and sometimes 8, because you could be sued if you give them an 8 when it was supposed to be a 7, right? You have a reputational risk problem. What's interesting is that I've seen commercial use cases who treated an LLM implementation or an AI implementation as a BI solution versus a software engineering solution. Software engineers think about constraining the input and constraining the output. BI people say, just show me an amazing result. So you might have something that doesn't constrain what's the appropriate level of questions to ask and doesn't constrain what's the appropriate levels of answers to give. And you now have a reputational problem because it's now answering a political question with a political response in the voice of Hulk Hogan. And that isn't necessarily what you want your bank to showcase.
No, exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
So you do have these black box governance problems in that you don't really control the input and the output if you don't think of it as a software engineering exercise. So governance becomes very important in terms of the data that you have and hold, the data you're allowed to use in those circumstances, and what what are the expected results. In fact, data quality has been a problem for the last 30 years, and it continues to be a problem. Right. Sure. 15 years ago, I had problems doing BI because my data was messy and siloed and all over the place. 5 years ago, I had a problem doing machine learning because my data was messy, siloed, and all over the place. And today I have a problem doing AI because my data is messy, siloed, and all over the place. Right. I haven't fixed that core problem.
Sure.
And creating a data warehouse didn't necessarily make it better, because sometimes I just copied my messy production data and put it into my data warehouse. Sure. I didn't actually think about the data quality concerns to support that. And as we all know, the real way to fix a data quality problem is at the source. But you don't control the source, right? If you have a bunch of SaaS applications, the source is the source. It is what it is. And you can apply logic and technology on its way to the destination. You could apply logic and technology once it's in the warehouse. You can apply logic and technology when you consume it and put it to a dashboard. But that could all fail, or it could all be wrong. You still have those, reputational and bias and privacy problems at the end of the day, which is why the use case becomes so important. What's the actual impact to you as an organization?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
You mentioned obviously privacy, which we alluded to. Would you give similar advice to personal usage of AI? I've seen I have friends and colleagues that are just really opening up everything to the AI, financial records, personal like health and things like that. Should people be aware and be wary of that? Or can they put safeguards in place? I'm curious around that. I know we're getting to
I would absolutely never do that.
Yeah.
That as a general rule.
Yeah, exactly.
I would absolutely. Now, in fairness, different generations have a different expectation and allowance in their head of what they will publicly disclose. Maybe my generation would be less likely to do that, but my teenagers generation is perfectly fine doing that. But know that the information you provide to a public entity and a public LLM is now owned by them. They have the right to train their model using it. They have the right to use it as an answer to a question by somebody else. That seems like a problem. In the enterprise setting, it means it is not in your best interest to use a free GPT to create code and put it into your product, because you now have a license. They now have a license to their code in your environment. The same would be true the other way. If you were to take your code and put it in their environment, you've now allowed them access to have and use your code for both training and answering purposes, right? There are limitations to that, but it's trust eventually is your limitation, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So be wary, be careful, use enterprise implementations if you want enterprise protections.
Yeah, I love that. I'm curious your opinions on how generations, I know you're dealing with a lot of the company level, but how you're seeing different generations adapt to AI. It's funny, I'm small sample size, but I talked to my cousins who are younger than me. I'm like, what are you guys using? And they're like, oh, we use Google, but we're on TikTok and we're using chat a little bit. And then I, pinged individuals that were in college. Yeah, we're using chat quite a bit, and we don't really make large decisions without it. And then older generations, we don't use Google anymore. It's just chat, or yeah, we still use Google. We're a little intimidated by it. I'm curious, what you're seeing. And what you're anticipating for the younger generation. Are they coming up? Are they just going to be immersed in these LLMs, and that's ubiquitous at this point? And then the other piece is to that, what are your thoughts? And I mean, broad question here too, putting you on the spot, how it impacts universities and education as a whole, because that's a strong piece there.
The academic implementation and use of GPT or any LLMs has dramatically changed the academic environment, right? The presumption now is that students from high school up are using that as their base research facility, their base testing or preparation for testing facility, and their base studying facility. That's just their academic side. They will also use GPTs for anything else that's happening in their lives. In fact, the likelihood they would use Google for anything text-based is very, very low. And any software they would use, let's say they were in graphic design, that's embedded functions within those tool sets that they're more likely to use to draft music, to draft visual, to draft video, to edit any one of those things. That's just going to be part and parcel of their everyday life. So from a professor's perspective, it makes it much more difficult to teach, right? Because you're moving away from basics will be known, the application will be known. So now it's not all about use cases, right? It's all about, here are the different ways it might go wrong. Here's all the gaps that you won't be able to read that's been trained by GPT. Here's how an experienced person would think about these problem sets versus an inexperienced person would think about these problem sets. It changes almost entirely sort of the teaching method to support that. In terms of older generations, and I would put myself in that sort of category, time and time again, they don't really know the distinction between prompting and keyword searches.
Really excellent point.
The amount of time that I need to teach prompting is 100%. Right? Because asking better questions leads to asking and getting better results. Right. So moving from keyword Googling to fully parsed out sentence. In fact, I don't even get them to write prompts anymore. I just get them to stream of conscious a bunch of bullet points and have that stream of conscious produce a prompt. And that's the prompt you actually use to prompt the question. And then, of course, I need to teach them that don't take the first answer as the truth. The first answer is a small corpus of data. It's only when you challenge the first answer does it open up to a different corpus, right? Only when you challenge the question to say, are you sure that everything you said was correct? I'm sure this statement is false. Does it look to other sources of data to augment its answer to produce a better result? Right? And I still have to teach that you still can trick a GPT. Right? You can convince it that it's wrong by providing your own opinion, and that's not helping you. That's making your knowledge worse because you're trying to convince them, not unlike you're trying to convince another human that you're right. And a good portion of the time, you're going to win that argument because it doesn't have the means or facility to debate you. Its goal in many ways is to have you be happy with the answer.
There's a lot of that the ego bait, right?
Yeah,
great stuff, excellent work. This is amazing, right? And I think you can people feed into it. OpenAI, they're not dumb, all right? They know how to structure these. Some takeaways, Paul. I'm going to pick your brain here. I'm curious. So we adopted a prompting process and an engineering kind of philosophy. I've been talking this a lot on the podcast around individuals like, what's the prompt? I just need one prompt. I'm good, right? Which is not the case, obviously, as you and I both know. I'm curious your thoughts on this and how we can probably evolve it ourselves and how we can give better advice to our clients and our team members. So what we typically do is we establish the context, right? What are we looking for? And be it, we are primarily using audio stream of consciousness. We are not typing, right? I think you mentioned that. We are then assigning the role of the GPT. I'm curious your thoughts on that one. Well, and I'll let me finish here. Assigning the role. Hey, expert in this. You have a ton of experience here or there, and then loosely describing the task. From there, we will let it run, but we'll stop it. And essentially, if we don't prompt it within that core prompt, having it interview us one by one, questions one by one to learn more, to get better. And one thing that resonated with me is that a lot of people, that's immediate gratification, Paul, right? Okay, I did this basic prompt. I get the answer. This is it. Great. Well, I'm good. But they're just scratching the surface on what could be possible, challenging the GPT, challenging and helping it ideate alongside. What are your thoughts on sort of that process? There's good principles to adopt? We want to get better. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Welcome to the distinct difference between prompting and prompt engineering. That, in many ways, is the definitional sort of 101 versus 201 distinction between the two, right? Is prompting is asking better questions to get better answers, and then probing with alternative questions to get alternative answers. Prompt engineering is saying, I'm going to replace code with text, with words, with a story, with a novel of content. And I want you to follow me down this path because I want you to derive answers based on a set of constraints I'm about to give you. And the difference is paragraph 5 to 10 pages. So what you're actually doing when you describe that is in fact software. One could argue that's coding. It's just coding with natural language, right? And I agree with you. You're setting it up just like a software engineer would. And in fact, having software engineering skill sets allows you to build a prompt better in that circumstance. So what are the inputs? What's the corpus of data I want you to look at? What's the process I want you to undertake, as loose or as defined as you want it to give,
Sure,
right?
sure.
Here's how I want you to score the results. Here's the format of the output I want you to provide. Everything I'm describing is exactly how a developer would describe a UX, right?
Yeah.
Describe a core application. You're just using natural language to do that.
Mhm.
And you can modify that as the outcome is distinctly different than how you want it to be. Or you can make it looser to say, you know what, I want you to be a little bit more inventive in the outcome based on the progress of the questions and answers we're about to go through.
Mhm.
That is the epitome of engineering.
Oh, I didn't know I was a software developer, Paul, but I
You're
guess
a software developer. It's 100% true. That is the difference. And in fact, being a software developer would probably put you in a position to write that prompt even better.
Mm.
Better doesn't mean more detailed or more descriptive. It just means sequenced in a way that an algorithm would appreciate it better.
Yeah, I love that distinction, right? Because I think we as a whole, just as a society, and I think I'm generalizing here, obviously, but just like more, and then we'll just figure it out. But I think, having some strategic skill sets and understanding how algorithms might or should work is obviously going to get to that result a little bit better, a little bit faster. So that's great stuff.
Yeah, there's definitely a more versus better distinction. And you're right that humans always think about more, right? We always think about more people, more process, more projects, more money, right? That's how they think.
Of course.
Versus better is saying, I want a highly interactive, I want a highly social, I want a highly mobile, and I want a highly creative interface. And that's how I want to describe this problem set, this problem in this prompt.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Switching gears here a little bit, Paul, who you're on a lot of boards, obviously you're involved in a lot of companies, you travel a ridiculous amount, you're meeting a lot of people, you're engaging with a lot of different cultures. Two-part question, essentially, who inspires you? How are you getting, I mean, you're in it. Your team is I've met some of them. They're brilliant individuals. They really push things. I'm curious on your end, who influences you? Who do you look up to, and how do you gain additional ideas? And then the second part here is, what tools or services, stuff that Pythian offers, I know, but maybe others that you're really excited about to see here in the future, and what's developing currently, or what's already out there.
So there are some very smart people at the hyperscalers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I do spend quality time with the Google engineering team, DeepMind, Alphabet holistically. And these are the people who are inventing the algorithms that might take decades to produce.
Okay.
I always mention when I do the education is, it all starts with these foundational models that took 35 years mathematically to produce. Right. So it's not 2 years old, these things. They're 35 years old. These are smart academics. And that's why I spend in many ways in so much of my time in the academic side. So I can see the mathematics before it becomes into the implementation side.
Mm-hmm.
So that my inspiration comes from kind of the futurists in the academic world.
Great.
And then, of course, I see it applied within the engineering of the hyperscalers. So I can see algorithm to algorithm where it makes sense for these particular use cases, as an example.
Sure.
And what was part B of that question?
Tools or services that you're really
right.
Yeah.
So think of AI in sort of 5 buckets of problems you want to solve, right? Okay. So bucket number 1 is much more advisory, right? So who in your network would you trust to help articulate a vision, determine and prioritize use cases, even to educate or provide an appreciation where we are in the current state of the world, or predict what might be the future so you can make investment decisions, right? That's kind of the advisory side. That's bucket number 1. Mm-hmm. Bucket number 2 is the people productivity side. So everybody uses collaboration tools. How do we ensure that we've enabled the teams to collaborate more effectively with AI? This is the Geminis of the world, the co-pilots of the world, right? Invest in that. And the reason why I want you to invest first in that is because that's where you really learn prompting. Mm-hmm. That's really where you get invested in how to learn how to create a sort of engineered prompt, or the prompt engineering side. Because as we know, you can deploy Copilot or Gemini and it's 17% productive. If you teach them for 3 hours, it's 50% productive. So that 3 hour investment is measured in millions of dollars, right? So that's number two.
Sure.
Number three, think about the embedded features of the software to which you have. That might be embedded GCP services like Looker, right? Or BigQuery or Composer, or embedded within Atlassian or in Salesforce. Those invocations of that value is closest to the individual user, right? Because you're going to have data scientists using Composer and have notebooks and accessing data in BigQuery. The closer you are to the data, the more value you can produce in a faster amount of time, right? So think about the embedded features as important.
Okay.
The fourth one is think about out of the box applications like enterprise search, right? So enterprise search is a combination of deep research, prompting, plus integration to core assets, right? So if you combine all those three together, I can ask an HR question, get an HR answer. And then finally, it's AI build, right? So let's narrow those 400 use cases to the 5, and then let's use current tool sets, but advanced thinking, right? Advanced architecture to get your high ROI deployed productionizable studies, right? Get some wins, earn some value, add features to your product or service, and then grow.
Yep. Yeah. Brilliant stuff, Paul. Invaluable resources. Last question here, slightly selfish of me here, but we're obviously a digital marketing shop. Google, right? Some big changes are happening. People on our side are interested to see what the future holds with the AI overviews. I know Gemini makes a big push. The I/O conference is going on right now. Google, it seems as though they're going to be relaunching their homepage, and it's going to be more GPT-esque, if you will. Google has about 90%, probably maybe 89. I don't know what it is right now in terms of the search market landscape. I'm curious what you're seeing or what you anticipate. Google's a behemoth. It makes a ton of ad revenue. They're going to have to pivot a little bit as people are using LLMs, people are using different search technologies, TikTok, et cetera, all those different social tools. I'm curious what your opinion is on that, and where do you see Google in the next 5 years evolving, or are they going to, is their market share going to slowly continue to shrink?
Google will have multiple sources of revenue. That is a fair statement.
Of course. Yeah.
They have, 89, 90% of the search market. And what most people forget is they have 7 applications that have over 2 billion users, right? Far beyond any other environment, including the Metas of the world.
Wild. Yep.
From that, they have a distinct understanding of everyday people, right? In fact, their NLP is improved by the decades of search to which they have, and their ability to see Gmail and YouTube and the applications to which run effectively most of the internet traffic, right? From that, they can build and replace their search with a multimodal interface. So not just keyword search anymore. I will upload a picture, a piece of music, and prompt and get a picture, piece of music, and a video clip. Right. That will be unique to Google, and very few other people will be able to overcome, especially since Google is the only one that actually has, 2 million miles of fiber across the oceans. Right. Their point of presence is not duplicatable by anybody over the next 30 years. Right. So they will win in that world. And yes, will they have to evolve sort of their ad side to support new interfaces? Certainly. Do I think they have the engineering prowess to do that? Certainly.
Yeah.
So I think they'll be fine.
I think they'll be all right. Let's not worry about lose sleep over Google. Let's be clear. Paul, this has been awesome. Super entertaining. A lot of nuggets here, and great to have you. I know, again, you're incredibly busy, so I really appreciate you prioritizing this and taking the time. Where can people connect with you and find more about Pythian? Talk to us about that.
Sure. I'm always found at Paul Lewis CTO on whatever social site you want to use, Paul Lewis CTO, and www.pythian.com. I highly recommend you starting in our AI spaces. And you'll see both things like the field CTO practice and our AI build capability. But as we all know, which is our tagline, love your data, that very few AI use cases can be successful if you don't have your data house in order. So we're happy to spend time preparing you your data environment, your data ecosystem, so that you can build those cool AI products and services that really is going to sort of create growth for you.
Sweet. That's great, Paul. Check him out and check out Pythian.com. Thanks again, Paul. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Built to Convert. If you're serious about growth, don't just listen. Subscribe, leave a review, and follow us for new episodes that drop straight into your feed. Until next time, keep building.